A lot of the internet these days feels pretty bought and paid for, don't you think? Well, at Escape Collective, we are also bought and paid for. The difference being that we are bought and paid for by you, which changes things dramatically. We're a member-funded group of journalists, and we call the shots. No hidden agendas, no sneaky links. Just trust. EscapeCollective.com/join. Support what we do.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to a bonus episode of the Geek Warning podcast from the Escape Collective. We've been promising the return of our much-loved Ask a Wrench episodes for, I'd say a really long time now. It's been several months, Dave, I think.
It's been a while.
Like that week has finally come, finally. For those of you who maybe aren't familiar with Ask a Wrench, it's where we take a whole bunch of questions from our Escape Collective members on a wide range of maintenance, and like repair and servicing, and just sort of like general tech questions. Put them in front of our panel of experts to get answers to those questions that hopefully everyone listening will find useful, or like at least entertaining. Anyway, I'm James Huang. I'm joined on this panel today by my fellow tech editor at Escape Collective, Dave Rome in Sydney, Australia. Hi, Dave.
Hello.
And after a far too lengthy hiatus is Pro Mechanic and owner-operator of the Boulder Gruppetto independent repair shop here in Boulder, Colorado, Zach Edwards.
Hello.
Hi, Zach. It's so good to have you back on the show.
Yeah, it's been a bit.
It's been, I mean, we may have to actually like scroll back to see how long it's been, but it's been too long.
Probably like, if I were to guess, like February-ish.
It's been a while.
Something, yeah.
Well, I mean, last time I saw you, you're clean shaved. Now you've got a beard just below your neck, so it's been a while. Like it's
Yeah.
just kidding.
Yeah, the last time you saw him, Ruth, he and Ruth didn't have any kids, and now they've got teenagers.
Nope, definitely not.
I know we did this math before, but I think what do we say? Like, what do we have in combined experience working as pro mechanics in bike shops? What, like something like 50 years or so between the three of us? Was that right? It seemed like too many.
It was a lot of years.
Yeah.
How many years of bitterness?
Lots.
Yeah.
Well, that amount of time has on the upsides definitely seen us working on a whole bunch of different bikes, pretty much anything and everything that's out there. At least pedal powered on two wheels and maybe sometimes three. So hopefully we've got the experience to provide good answers to all of your questions. All of the questions that we're going to ask here have come directly from our Escape Collective members. And speaking of which, since this is a bonus episode of our Geek Warning show, only members are going to get access to the whole thing. So if you are hearing this right now, that means you're not currently a member. That also means you're only going to get a portion of this episode. Want the whole thing? You need to head over to escapecollective.com/join to sign up. Before we dive into questions, I need to catch up with our panel here just a little bit. So Dave, your last threaded column on the site, you covered a whole bunch of stuff like tools and tips for dealing with internal cable routing.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to make a request for a future threaded column.
Sure.
How about something on bolt extractors?
Are you saying that because you have access to my computer and you've seen what I'm literally working on for this week?
No, I seriously have not.
That is crazy.
No.
That is so crazy.
That's kind of creepy. Dave, how long have you and I worked together again? We figured it's something like 12, 14 years or something?
It's been more than a decade, yeah. Yeah.
I seriously,
is nuts.
We seriously have not discussed this beforehand. I'm not joking.
Okay. All right. I'm feeling a little creeped out right now.
All right.
Fair enough.
I guess that means my request is going to be granted.
Yes. Yeah. I might split it into two parts because it's proving a big topic. But the first part will focus on more prevention and dealing with rounded heads of bolts.
Okay.
So tips and tricks and tools for that, where basically, leaving the drill and the Dremel alone for now.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Zach, as we already mentioned, it's been quite a while since I've been in your space here. You're as usual, you're busy, but thankfully not like totally buried in boxes and stuff as you typically would be. But I am curious. So you are a fully independent one-person repair shop, meaning it is just you.
Me. Yep.
Doing everything. I would imagine it is often tempting to just kind of like take on more and more work because that does mean more and more money. But I am curious for the sake of mechanics out there who might either be already doing what you're doing or considering doing what you're doing. How do you make sure you carve out time for yourself?
I guess, yeah, that's a loaded question. I definitely try. I have a hard time saying no to people.
But that's part
not
of what
necessarily
makes you
because
so
I'm
likable.
like, oh, I could work more and make more money. It's more just like because I want to help people. And then most people are customers that I've worked with for years and years and years and have a relationship with. And it's really difficult for me to be like, actually, sorry, I can't help you before whatever your race is this weekend or the ride that you're doing or whatever the situation. But I do try. I feel like lately I've been trying to schedule things a little bit better so I'm less underwater so that by August I don't hate bikes. But yeah, otherwise just try and ride my bike and yeah.
So pretty basic stuff. Well, let me ask you this. How long did it take you to figure out how to establish those boundaries? Because I'm going to guess that you didn't really do a whole lot of that early on.
Yeah, I mean, early on, right? Like I would say every year that I've done this, I've gotten busier and busier. So like, let's say the first year it was pretty easy to schedule things. But now it's what, I don't know, 6-7 years later, maybe.
Has it been that long already?
I think it has been.
Wow.
Something like that. Yeah, quite busy all the time, which is good.
Any regrets?
Not really. I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
How about that? Interesting.
But
All
yeah.
right. Zach, it is good to always see you busy in here. And it's good to see that you're not like grumpy, as I know we always make you out to be.
Yeah,
Grumpy old
try not
hater.
to be grumpy.
But it's good to see that you're enjoying your gig.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's go ahead and move into some questions here, shall we? Since that's what everyone's listening here for, not to just hear us chit chat. I know that we talk about this subject all the time, but we did get several questions on this topic. So the first question is going to be coming from Dave in Edmonds, Washington in the USA. Dave said, well, this question concerns internal cabling. Dave said, we all know the world would be a better place if all headsets were sealed and all cables were still on the outside, but alas, they are not. I've got a 2023 Scott Addict 10 actually with SRAM access because we specifically recommended on a previous show to only go electronic with internal routing. Dave lives, as he said, in the Pacific Northwest. He said as much as he loves the look of slammed stems and no spacers, he's found that his back gets cranky if he doesn't run pretty much the max spacers and a 6 or 7 degree stem flipped up. Question, however, when you have to run that sort of setup, running the full internal routing thing is not really super possible. So he wants to know, how does he fill the gaping maw of his stem spacer for cables? Or better yet, what options exist to switch to traditional round spacers with a headset top cap that has just 2 specific holes for hydro hosing? Zach, what you got?
Well, I think that bike, it uses a more or less, it's a Scott stem, but it's basically a normal stem that you can flip up and down normally and the hoses run underneath it.
It is, but I looked into that a little bit. The issue with that, it's sort of FSA style where the uppermost spacer kind of is profiled along with the bottom of the stem.
The plastic spacer is designed to be with the stem down. So then it looks terrible when the stem's up.
Exactly.
So in an ideal world, Scott would make a piece that's made for this.
Well,
or there's like a million online 3D printing places.
Well, I looked into this a little bit. So that bike, it uses an Acros headset, model number AIF-1112, in case you're wondering. So one thing that I think it's good to remind people is while a lot of bikes now have what are kind of billed to be proprietary headsets for internal cable routing, a lot of them also aren't proprietary headsets. So Acros in particular, they are definitely a pretty big third-party supplier for companies who want to run internal cabling. And there definitely is not a whole lot of great documentation on this as far as what other options you can run, but it's a pretty standard bearing. And there are definitely other brands that use Acros headsets. So as I said, it was a little unclear to me when I was looking around online earlier. But because that upper bearing is almost certainly shared with other Acros headsets that probably do have internal cabling, Acros does have upper headset covers that just have a couple of ports where hoses can feed straight in. So I'd recommend contacting Acros, not Scott, to see what sort of options might be available, because you might be surprised.
That would then allow you to run just normal round headset spacers.
Exactly.
So it still is not going to be the most aesthetically pleasing because the brake hoses are going to be more exposed.
Correct.
But then you don't have like plastic gaps.
Yeah. So
a tarmac frame. It's going to come with upper bearing caps to allow you to run it with their stem or to run it with a normal stem that the brake hoses just come out. And a lot of frames are that way. So I would think that would likely be a spare part that Scott has.
I don't know the Attic too well, but I don't know the current generation of Attic too well. But I'm assuming that headset bearing is not just Acros compatible; that it would be pretty standard 1.5 inch upper bearing.
I think it's actually 1.25 if I remember correctly.
Because is that one of the ones using the offset steerer? That's Scott's
yes, I believe so.
Never mind.
Yep.
So that does limit the options a little bit compared to some bikes using 1.5 inch upper bearings. But yeah, okay. I'll go with Zach's advice on that one. Contact Scott for recommendations.
But either way, I would contact Scott and Acros directly just to see what they say. Because as Zach mentioned, I mean, sometimes when you buy a frame set, you do get more parts, like more little headset bits and that sort of thing that you would get if you bought a whole bike. So maybe those parts already exist from Scott. Maybe they don't. But again, if they're not available from Scott, they very well may be available from Acros. So David in Edmonds, Washington, I don't think you're stuck. So I'd get a hold of one or both of those companies and see what turns out. All right. Well, sticking to the theme for now, this next question comes from Greg Jenna, who described himself as an American living in the UK. Greg's thinking about getting a new road bike this year. He'd like to build it himself, which he's done several times before. However, the prospect of dealing with fully hidden hoses makes him hesitate. Of all the approaches to internal cabling out there, who has the easiest system to work on? We've kind of answered this before, but I feel like it's worth revisiting because clearly it's still a question. Who wants to grab this one first?
I mean, I would say there are a lot of them out there now, and some are definitely better than others. The biggest thing I would say is a stem that allows you to remove a spacer from underneath it and put a spacer on top without cutting the steer tube. Particularly for a new bike build, you're not 100% on the position. Like, it sucks when you cut the steer tube too short and you're stuck with too aggressive a position.
Yeah.
But I mean, other than that, it's just like shoving hoses through things.
The easiest, like most of them are pretty much, very similar as far as routing the brake hose or cables through the frame. Like, I think that's pretty consistent these days. Like some, the routing's not as clean as others, but it's really, once you get to the stem and handlebar, I think is where the most pain is often. So if the hose is going through the stem and the handlebar, then that's going to be harder than a bike that just pops them out at the headset cap and then you direct them underneath the stem and underneath the handlebar.
Yeah, as far as like independent or I guess third-party frames or like kind of smaller brands or whatever, I feel like I'm not always a huge fan of a lot of FSA stuff, but I feel like their ACR
is my least favorite.
Well, I like it in the sense that it gives you a lot of flexibility. So I like styles like that.
Yeah.
Just that, like you said, Zach.
Not their stem.
Well, yes, but I do like how you're not forced into that. So again, like if the hoses are going to go through the headset no matter what. But from there, I definitely prefer systems that do not go through the stem or the handlebar. So anything that allows you at least the option of running it externally from there, from a maintenance standpoint, I feel like it saves some headache later on for sure.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, the ACR, like their integrated system is guilty of what Zach just said, where it doesn't really allow you to put spacers on top of it.
And there's too, the way the like top cap is shaped, it's like you have to cut the steer tube really, really short. So then like for future, if you wanted to use a different stem or something, you kind of can't.
For some of them, you can't just put a round spacer on top. But
yeah,
the most common ones that everyone stocks with the FSA.
Yeah,
ones.
like the
one that the top cap is kind of like rounded.
Yeah. They're more premium setups for sure. They are much more limiting in that sense.
Yeah.
But regardless, again, whichever way you go, just do yourself a favor and don't run the lines through the stem or the handlebar. It would just be so much easier. All right, well, let's go ahead and call that question answered, I think.
Zach's
last
face
one.
says otherwise, but we'll move on.
That's fine. I mean, like finding us a bike that doesn't, very few bikes don't go through the stem or the handlebar or both, I would say.
It's becoming less frequent for sure. But I will say that a lot of bikes where the lines run through the handlebar and not through the stem, oftentimes you don't have to run those lines through the bar, particularly if you still wrap bars traditionally
all the way to the stem,
kind of all the way toward the stem.
Yeah.
If you're running a bar where it's not taped up top, which I personally think is kind of silly. But
the Aerowatts.
Yeah. Yes. But like if there is a bar where you don't want to run tape up top, then you're pretty much stuck with internal routing through the bar. But aside from that, like I said, if you have the option, it just makes it easier if you don't do it. All right. One last question regarding internal cable routing. This one comes from Alan in Kildare, Ireland. Alan's got a question about A Trek checkpoint that has internally routed hoses through the headset bearing. Wants to know what's the best process for getting the fork out to remove the lower bearing. I'm not really sure there's a whole lot of like options here. You kind of just have to disconnect everything.
Yeah. I mean, the rear brake, you probably don't have to, depending on what bar setup you use. Like those that usually allow a fair bit of slack between the bar and the stem, like headset top cap, because those are like what James' ideal scenario is, where it doesn't go through the stem or the bar. Maybe you have to undo some bar tape so you don't have to disconnect the rear, but just to give it more slack. But the front, you'll definitely have to undo the front brake from the lever, and then because the lower bearing, the brake hose goes through the lower bearing for the front.
Yeah, not really any shortcuts that I can think of. It sort of is what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The best shortcut on that is more frequent maintenance of dropping the fork just enough that you can access it, clean the bearing, add some grease to the outside of it, and put it back together without undoing as many things. And that should extend the life of your bearing quite a bit.
And like that bike too, like I said, that allows a fair bit of slack in the brake hoses, so it's pretty easy to drop the fork.
Yeah.
At least enough to access the bearing and clean things.
That should be a bike you're very familiar with at this point, Zach.
I've worked on many checkpoints.
All right, let's leave internal cable routing behind here. Let's move on to some more general tool and workshop questions here for a bit. This one comes from Adam in Bentonville, Arkansas, again in the U.S. This is an Dave. This one's kind of for you, I think. Adam said he's a new facility member at the Northwest Arkansas Community College. At the moment, they're having students buy the EK3 toolkit from Park Tool. He's looking at building out a new toolbox for the students to purchase from the college bookstore. He's looking to lower the cost from $1,000 US to closer to like less than $500 ideally. The goal is that this toolkit will be of high quality, long lasting tools that they can use to accomplish most tasks in a pretty professional environment. He's hoping to get our suggestions on a buy once, cry once kind of build out.
So it's meant to be a community box that mechanics can all use from.
It's meant to be sort of like if you're buying books for a course. It's going to be a kit for each person.
Oh,
each sort of each mechanic in training to buy for themselves.
Gotcha. Instead of the EK3, which is a very nice suitcased kit from Park Tool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like this. I really like that there's a community college doing this. That's cool.
So do I.
That's a good question. For $500. EK3 the EK3 is probably where I'm still going to settle on for that sort of money, because it gives you a toolbox with actual space to grow, and it's a professional kit that you can use for years and years and years for professional use. So I don't think my advice for that sort of money will change. Short of that, I'd probably be suggesting that they actually build something out piece by piece. If it's something that's going to be bought by 10 students, then they can probably negotiate some sort of deal on buying each tool. And for $500, you can just get some really good quality fundamental tools.
What I wonder actually is if that bookstore, if Adam might be able to contact someone at Park Tool directly and potentially, I don't know if there's some sort of student discount or something like that, where Park Tool can just drop ship that toolkit.
They normally deal with community run training businesses and that sort of thing. Park Tool's pretty progressive in that regard. So I would say that's probably a pretty good option.
Well, in light of that, Dave, do you have any tool brands that are typically a little less expensive to Park that you like?
Not if they're trying to build out a kit for professional use. I would say Park is probably a pretty good level to stick at if that's the goal. You get a lifetime warranty, and it's decent stuff. I probably wouldn't recommend actively seeking cheaper stuff than Park Tool if you have ambitions of learning the craft and wanting to make money from it.
Okay, Zach.
I mean, I feel like for just like a kit, Park usually is a pretty good bet. I would say maybe it doesn't work in this case, but I would always prefer kind of building the kit around what you are working on and what you're trying to do. So like piece by piece. And even if that's like you start with basic things, and then you're like, oh, I need to work on this bottom bracket and I need this bottom bracket tool. So buy that. Because a lot of these kits, they come with, let's say you use 75% of the tools, but then the rest of them you won't ever use because it's just tools that aren't really used on bikes anymore, or the bikes that you're working on or whatever.
Yeah. So
Yeah, so in that sense, at least the initial cost, even if the cost long term might be a little bit greater than what that EK3 might cost initially, then at least maybe the very base kind of get into the door cost might be a little bit lower. Then you buy what you need as you go. But I guess I wonder for this particular situation, if it's a bike mechanic course, it probably would be a good idea. I think what Adam's looking for is a kit that every student will have, and they'll all be the same.
Yeah.
So that I guess from a curriculum standpoint, it's important for everyone to have the same kit.
yeah, there's not too
Adam,
many wasted tools in that EK3. Like I'm looking at it, probably the headset spanner is the only thing that you might not use too often on a modern bike, but in a sort of community university sense, you probably will need that sort of tool anyway. So
yeah, definitely.
So yeah, thankfully there's not too many old standard tools in that kit. It's a pretty modern offering, and overall, I'd say the price is on the high side because of that case that it comes with. So perhaps, if you're trying to get in underneath the price point of the EK3 kit, then the answer would probably be to look at the tools it comes with and try replicate that list, but perhaps without the toolbox.
Just without a box. Don't Pedros do some kits that are like come in more of a tool roll?
Yep, they do. The burrito roll is another good option. It's sort of at a park tool level. It's just the list of tools that it comes with is a bit more limited, so they'll need to be building out on that immediately.
Right.
It's much more a portable sort of home mechanic list of tools versus a mechanic in training set of tools. So,
Right.
Well, Adam, it sounds like the consensus here is to not go too much cheaper than that Park EK3. That said, Adam, you can certainly get in touch with myself or Dave, and we can certainly try and put you in touch with the people at Pedro's and or Park, and then see what they can do for you. Because again, I think both of those companies would be pretty open to doing something in a university setting like that. So we might be able to help you get something figured out here. All right, next question comes from Andreas in Berlin, Germany. Dave, I feel like this one's kind of also for you because you've written at length at this topic. Is it okay to loosen bolts with a digital torque wrench? Because in a previous post, you had written, quote, don't use it to undo fasteners because the breakaway torque, which can be higher than the initial torque, can overload and damage the tool, unquote. However, Andreas' question is, with a digital torque wrench based on a strain gauge, wouldn't that just lead to an out-of-range measurement? So is it safe to do that sort of thing with a digital torque wrench?
Strain gauges are perhaps even more sensitive to overload than a spring. So
because those do break, actually.
Yeah. So once you go over the recommended range of a strain gauge, it will be damaged. So your torque wrench will no longer be accurate across its usable range. So you can undo bolts with the torque wrench as long as the torque while you're undoing it remains within the range of the torque wrench. So if your digital torque wrench, I think most of them are like 3 to 20-ish Newton meters, most of the ones on the market, and it gives you a live peak torque reading as you're using it. So yeah, as long as while you're using it, you don't see that number go too far beyond 20 or whatever the max torque on the wrench is, you probably can use it to undo bolts. It's just best practice not to.
All right, Andreas. Well, there is your answer. Unless you want a very, very expensive, not very good breaker bar.
Pre-interruption, I had a question for Dave. Is there a downside with digital or not to just crank it to the max and then loosen the bolts with it?
Well, yeah. So the risk is that you still go over that max.
Yeah.
So that's the downside. Is assuming that you're not going to go over the max, then it's probably fine. I mean, you might be causing more wear on the wrench than ideal for such an expensive tool, but yeah, I mean, it's fine. But yeah, there's just the risk that you go over that maximum range of the torque wrench because breakaway torque is significantly higher than turning torque.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like the moral of the story here is why run the risk?
Yeah.
Have more tools.
Yeah. Just use this as an excuse to buy yourself a nice breaker bar.
I mean, most torque wrenches are ratchet, right? So it takes literally 2 seconds to pop a ratchet off and put a torque wrench on, and vice versa.
What do you mean by that?
If like the same bit, like rather than right. If you don't want to go like, oh, I need to go find my Allen key or whatever.
Yeah.
You already have the same bit.
Yeah. So with all that said, there are some torque wrenches on the market that actually do allow you to undo bolts. So Presticycle's torque keys, which are also anything with the torque key branding on it, which are like preset wrenches, they actually are locked anti-clockwise, so you can undo bolts with them. And then Wera has recently started releasing some torque wrenches with the lockout mode, which is pretty cool. So you can just slide up a collar or lock it out, and yeah.
A torque wrench with a lockout mode. Is it like a crown mounted knob or a remote switch?
Yeah. I'm waiting for the flight attendant torque wrenches, but
where it just automatically predicts what you're going to lose.
Exactly. But yeah, the lockout mode, as with the mountain bike, there is the risk of accidentally going into a section where you anticipate the wrench to move and you've accidentally locked it out. So just beware.
Again, moral of the story: just get yourself a regular ratchet or breaker bar.
Yeah.
All right. Well, next question comes from Andrew Newman in London in the UK. Andrew said he really enjoyed my piece on the old Campagnolo toolbox. He said it made him think about all the obsolete tools he's accumulated over the decades. What are our favorite tools that are no longer useful? Yeah, interesting. I'm gonna go ahead and go first on this one. This one was actually a tool that was donated to me by an Escape Collective member. Actually, it may have actually been a member at the old place. I can't remember how long it's been now. But it's an old rim puller that they actually handed to me like in person at Sea Otter one year. I have actually not had an opportunity to use it. I have a friend's kid's bike who most definitely needs it. Haven't had my hands on the bike yet, however. And I haven't needed it personally because I've mostly been running carbon rims. But that's probably one that I kind of treasure just because it's one that I always wanted. And even though I never really get to use it,
it's like the big,
it's not that big. It's probably like
not to straighten the sidewall.
It's a radial puller
to pull the rim.
Pull out a flat spot.
Yeah.
Yep. It is it's cast steel or it might be cast aluminum. It's a cast metal tool. It's pretty burly, pretty industrial.
Yeah.
But I love it so because again,
I remember the shop I started working at. They had one of those that was for bending fork legs back.
Oh yeah.
Which is like the thing that clamped in the vise and sketch.
Yeah, the fork leg one's not made anymore, but the rim puller one you can still buy. I think Cyclist still makes them.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I don't remember what brand this one was, but this one has clearly seen some things because there was still a price tag on it, if I remember correctly, and definitely many, many, many years of grime and patina on it. That thing's got stories to tell. For either of you guys have any good old tools?
What springs to mind, and because I got it quite early in my mechanic days, is I got the first generation of Philwood external bottom bracket service overhaul tools. So it's this really
you popped the bearings out.
Yeah, it's this really specific tool that just like only works on like the first generation of like Shimano and Race Face external cup English threaded bottom brackets. Yeah. And it goes in a bench vise, and it was, remove the dust seal, remove the bearing, and then it pressed it back in, and it was super precise. And I still actually occasionally do that task these days, but I've got a myriad of other tools that work with presses that do the exact same thing and do it much quicker. So that tool now collects dust, but I just remember that being such an awesome tool, and I was so smug at the time because everyone else is throwing out their crummy bottom brackets because the first early generations of those bottom brackets are pretty bad, especially from Race Face, and I was putting in early day enduro bearings into all of them, and like a wise ass.
I would just like to point out that tool is not technically gathering dust because I'm sure it's sitting in a drawer.
It is. It's very well protected. It's in its original box,
it's not getting exactly where there is just not a chance that you have any tools that are sitting out anywhere where they're actually collecting dust.
No, there's a few, but yeah, that one is in. Yeah, doesn't see the light of day. Yeah,
interesting. Zach,
I have an old travel case just full of old tools that are no longer used, but my favorite one hasn't made it in that box yet. But I don't use it very often anymore. Probably once every few months. Is part of your Campy box is the Campy hub axle vise tool.
For
quick release wheels. Yeah. It is so far superior to every other one on the market, but only works for quick release wheels.
It does.
Or track wheels or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I use that, it just makes me so happy.
It's such a simple design.
It's so simple, and it just clamps really well. It doesn't kind of move out of place, and it's just really, really good. But I don't get to use it very often these days.
Speaking of that Campagnola toolkit, Bruce Judson, if you are listening to this, I know I still owe you some bread. It is coming, I promise.
Wait, you traded a Campagnola toolkit for some bread?
Dave is like, I wish I baked bread.
This may be a story for another day.
Oh my goodness. The cost of bread in Boulder is absurd.
All right. Hey, remember when I told you you're going to get cut off? Well, I am nothing if not a man of my word. If you want to get the rest of this episode of Geek Warning and every other special episode of Geek Warning, along with everything else, you can find at escapecollective.com. Head over to escapecollective.com/join to sign up. Hopefully we'll see you back here in a few.